So I know we had discussed on the show prior the different conferences' objections to expanding the college football playoff, and I kind of wrote the ACC's player safety objection off as just kind of lip service and an excuse to stall to try to ultimately throw a Hail Mary and land
Yeah.
Notre Dame or some type of different TV deal. But is the ACC just kind of taking the bullet for the rest of these guys and throwing up the flag and saying, hey, player safety, but actually meaning it from a liability standpoint? Like, is that one of the reasons we are not expanding the playoff, because they want to try to make a move to say, hey, like, we're not playing more football, we're playing less football, and then we're expanding the playoff so that we're kind of net as opposed to expanding out and playing more snaps with more football being played in the playoff?
Yeah, I think I will take them at their word on the Notre Dame thing. They've been asked that directly, Jim Phillips, and he said that's absolutely not a factor. I will take them at their word, because I don't think delaying this 2 years helps Notre Dame get into the ACC, if that makes sense. And again, I will take them at their word on why they're voting no. They've called for this 365-day holistic review of college football, where some of this is being discussed, and Jim Phillips and the ACC is absolutely in favor of these things that we're talking about, these rules that are being discussed right now, the exposure movement, if you will. So that's why they voted against it. I think it's nothing more than that. The coaches are on board. We know publicly Dabo's, no more football. Pat Narduzzi's on record as saying that. I think Mac Brown is as well. So I think, I'm not saying their concerns are legitimate, because, look, there's a reason why 8 other conferences voted for it, and they knew it was coming. And the ACC was one of those conferences, as Greg Sankey's pointed out many times, that 3 years ago, we absolutely need expansion. They need access. I think they can't see the forest for the trees, but I think there's no other agenda there. I think it is what it is. It's to help the student athlete. It's to put a pause button on the game, and maybe, the agenda, maybe the SEC from taking over the world, because that's what the alliance looked like when it was formed, and that's still what it looks like today.
Do you know if there's been any consideration for, like, obviously they're calling it exposures. They're not really trying to shorten the length of the games. They're trying to shorten the amount of plays in the game, the quote unquote exposures. Has there been any contact with television networks for how they might feel about this if it does lead to shorter games time-wise, and therefore less opportunities to go to commercial?
Yes, all the executive producers of the rights holders are being invited this week to the meeting in Indianapolis. So NBC, CBS, Fox, who am I missing? There's one other in there.
It's a 4-letter network?
Yeah.
ESPN?
Never heard of it.
Obviously ABC with ESPN are being invited for their input. And one of the things being discussed, not a huge deal, but to get commercials in. You guys probably all watch the Golf Channel, because that's where I see it the most, the side-by-side where action is going on one side and you're selling a floor cleaner on the other for 30 seconds, and nobody misses anything. I think you could easily fit it in football on an extra point, which are just like, that's nothing these days. It's not like the NFL where they miss a few of them every year. These are automatic. So I think you could do that and fit that in and get your commercials in. The average, I was told this a few years ago, I don't know if many people know this, in the average college football game, there are 64 30-second spots. Mm-hmm. So they have to fit those in. That's 32 1-minute spots, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of stuff, and it's a big reason why these games are so long. But I think the last average I saw for 2020 maybe was 3 hours and 18 minutes. So that's way down than what it was before.
How have you gamed out the college football playoff expansion path? As you mentioned, trying to touch base with everybody else and trying to understand what these motivations are and whether you're going to take someone at their word. And Greg Sankey, even, with that very cryptic, we're going to have to rethink our position. As we sit here now, how do you think that the path to expansion, which does seem inevitable, it might not be from your seat, but how do you think we end up getting there by the time it is going to be 2 years from now? We are going to be talking about a new contract, and the college football playoff, as you've mentioned, might sort of become synonymous with college football, with being the league office, so to speak, and really governing and running the sport. How do you think these next steps are going to go as they try to get everybody on board, at least a majority on board, with the future of how we decide a national champion?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot more complicated, not less. That's not to say it can't happen, but think about this. 30 months from today, which seems is a blink of an eye in TV negotiations worlds, ESPN is going to sit down with an exclusive negotiating window for 30 days with the CFP. Are they going to come with a monster offer and try to keep the thing for the next 12 years? I don't think there's a number they can put out there right now that can keep the commissioners from going to market, because that's where the big money is. Within the next 4 years, a bunch of the stakeholders that we know right now are going to be retired. I think Bill Hancock's going to be retired, the executive director. He's 71. Bob Bowlesby is 70. Jack Swarbrick, the Notre Dame AD, is 67 or 68. Craig Thompson, who was on the subcommittee that formed expansion from the Mountain West, is 65. A lot of these people who did this were going to be retired. Look what happened in the last 3 years or 2 years when we had 3 new commissioners. That's the reason why we don't have expansion. So they've got to be brought up to speed. And then I think one of the biggest things complicating expansion by rubber stamp in 26, do we all, agree that by then players in some sort of fashion are going to be compensated, maybe have collective bargaining rights? Where's that money going to come from? How's it going to be regulated? Are the schools going to be partners? Does football and men's basketball separate and just, pay the schools a license to wear their jerseys so they can be paid and get out from under Title IX so they don't have to deal with that? All that's going to come into play in the next 4 years. So that's why I think a lot of this, I'm not saying it can't happen. I just think a lot of things got to be worked out before they even start to think about expansion in 26.
With some of these rules that we discussed a couple of minutes ago, I think there's some debate. Like I was blown away that most fans, I put out a poll, like, are college football games too long? And 66% said no, said they're good. Now they did clarify in the comments that the ads are too long. Like get rid of the ads, but give me the same amount of plays. So they don't want the rule changes to speed up the game. They want to get rid of the ads, keep the amount of plays the same. But on an area where I think, and I haven't done a poll on this one, but just seeing the dialogue that takes place when this is called is targeting. And I thought it was interesting because I want to be sure like what direction I think we're going this, because I agree with you can't just undo it. But flagrant 1, flagrant 2 is something that has been brought about a lot. I do think there needs to be a better solution than what we have. What do you think happens with targeting in this cycle where we can change the rules?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I delved into that last fall, and I guess the answer I got is the coaches, or at least the AFCA, is in favor of flagrant 1, flagrant 2. Steve Shaw, who again is merely the secretary editor of the Rules Committee, and they are subject to feedback from the AFCA and other sources, are against flagrant 1 and flagrant 2 because it would delay. It would put more pressure on replay officials and officials to make that call and delay the game further. They want to keep it basically as it is. It's a bang bang play. What do you do to, what happens to the person who's injured, or not injured, but the person who the foul is against? Do you lessen the penalty? And that's what that's really dicey. Or do you do something as simple as, okay, if it happens in the fourth quarter, are you kicked out of the game for the rest of that game and not the remainder of the next game? Because that's what it is right now. And that's what they have to discuss. Again, the optics of that is if it happens in the last minute of a fourth quarter and that's all he misses, then what are you talking about player safety? You're not incentivizing conduct by the players. So that's stuff they have to discuss that I don't think they'll go back on.
I wish there was a way, because I think the penalty is too severe in most cases. You see, but it clearly by the rule, the officials are getting the call right, targeting, ejected. I wish there was a way they could take that time and do it at the league office, but then you have like who doles out the punishment then and decide, all right, then you could take all the time in the world, judge intent. Is this a half? Is this a full game? But it doesn't solve the problem in the immediate sense. Like, because there's going to be controversial targeting calls. And if you don't slow down the game and look at them, you could get it wrong. And then they look it back on it. They're like, yep, we missed it, but you had to call it in the moment. So it's a complex issue for sure.
I'll do it.
Yeah, I would do it too.
I'll do it. I'll be the NCAA, whoever's in charge. I'll be the replay for targeting guy. You just send it to me. I'll be in a booth somewhere and I'll be like, flagrant 1, flagrant 2.
Right.
Just move on. I'll do it in 10 seconds.
I'll do it with you. I think it's pretty clear cut too.
The last time we gathered in Destin, Florida for the SEC spring meetings, Steve Shaw was there and he got all the reporters in a room. And we actually got these elaborate clickers and he showed us reviews, showed us targeting plays. Okay, right now, what's your call? Boom. And I was so flustered. I think I got 5 out of 12 right, or what was perceived to be right at the time when they made the call. And it gave you a new, I guess, appreciation for how tough it is for these guys. You can slow it down, and they inevitably do on these plays to show, oh, it wasn't intent. The guy moved his head. He's in the way. I don't know what the answer is, but I think largely it's going to be kept in place like it is.
But that's it. They've got like 1,000 rules they have to enforce and be aware of. If I just only have to be aware of targeting, sitting in a booth and know the rules inside and out, I could do it really quick.
Maybe that's the answer. Add a targeting person in the booth.
Mm-hmm.
But I know what Dennis is talking about because when I was at ESPN, he did the same thing. He presented it to all the broadcasters. So so you didn't go too harsh on the officials. There are some that are very tricky. And it's one of those things with replay, even in calls, is it a fumble or not? You see some and you're like, well, I can make the case either way or another. It isn't always a slam dunk. I'm with you, Tom. I feel like you can nail it most of the time, but there is that, 3% of the time where it's a little bit confusing. What do you do? And those are the ones that cause the most problems usually.
Bud, you're muted.
You're muted.
Well, okay. Sorry, the kid was screaming downstairs.
He doesn't like the show.
Hey, Leo.
Yeah,
You can go back to
he's watching live
now.
downstairs. We're homesick from school today.
Tractor.
Getting the job done.
Yeah.
All right, Dennis. So you said you only got 5 of 12 right, but that may just be your common sense may have got like 12 of 12 right, and the way the rule is written, it ended up causing those to be quote unquote incorrect answers. I do have a question though. So we had these in 2006. It was largely a disaster, the clock rules, right? And nobody liked the product. But I keep hearing the word from you, perception and liability and inherit. Are they in a position to where, what if these rules, Tom asked, could they roll them back in 2 years, theoretically? Like, is there any way you could see, even if these totally suck, that they're going to roll them back? Because wouldn't a rollback be perceived by the attorneys who are putting together the timeline of NCAA governance and how much care is being put towards treating player safety and injuries? Like, wouldn't a rollback be seen as not caring about player injuries? Like, this is, if they do this, is there any way it's not here to stay, even if it stinks?
No, I think they could look. I think if there's a liability issue, that they'll find a way to change it after a year. But again, what we're talking about, if they institute it, it's going to be less plays, not more, less exposures. That's what this is all about. But yeah, when they only do this every other year, are they, like Tom said, are they stuck with it for 2 years? Is it just a bad rule for 2 years instead of 1 year in 2006? And look, I don't think the science is exact. What they've done here to get to this point is go through every game in the last 15 years. And instead of adding plays, that's why we're at exposures. Exposures mean punts, kickoffs, PATs, 2-pointers, and they're still trying to find a way to research how many declined penalties. Yeah, declined penalties that involve contact, pass interference, holding, what have you. To add that's a big lift because there's no database for that. I don't think you'd almost have to go through every game book and look for it. But I think they're going to try to estimate it. And what they've come up with so far is in the last 15 years, it kind of spiked in 2014. I think the number that was given to me was there were 179 total plays per game that year. it doesn't really mean anything because we've got nothing to compare it to. I mean, divided in half, that's 90 exposures per team equally. But we don't know what that is in previous years. The SEC's done its own research. Greg Sankey told me that with these rules or something close to it, you could cut exposures back where teams would play the equivalent of 1.2 less games per season. Now, you don't think that would get the attention of the ACC and Dabo Sweeney and some of those people? It absolutely would. But does that impact the game so negatively that it starts to look like 2006? That's the question.
What's your sense on the likelihood that these rules are passed and put in place?
I think they'll be passed. I mean, then it becomes a question of, an inexact science, how much do they impact the game? As I've said all along, the first down thing is really, the differentiating line between the pros and college. And if they cross that line, what does that look like? Is it so many less plays per game that it's just a different game? And look, at the end of the day, do injuries go down? There's going to be some information released on Friday regarding kickoffs. And I don't know what it is, but apparently there's been a profound drop in injuries, both catastrophic and regular injuries on kickoffs, with the implementation of the fair catch, with the ball, most of the balls being going in the end zone for touchbacks, where hardly any balls are being returned, but at least the kickoff is still in the game. And then you weave in the fact that a disproportionate amount of injuries come from the kickoff. There were only, I think the number that was given to me was like, I want to say 6 per game. Don't hold me to that on average right now. But the overabundance of injuries that come from that, and that's been going on for decades. We know that because of the hitting. They've changed the wedge. No more 3-man wedge. I think it's down to 2 now. But Fridays are going to come some information on that, where that in itself, less exposures on the kickoff, has worked.